Perfect. Okay, I see a few people joining us today. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on a Monday, no less. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I see everyone trickling in. We'll just get started in about a minute because we have a really great webinar planned for today. So I appreciate everyone's time joining us today. Perfect. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see everybody. Perfect. Okay, we're just going to get started, I think, in just a few seconds. I see a lot of people have joined us now, which is wonderful. Let's wait a few more seconds. Okay, perfect. So I see a few people still trickling in, but I think that we should get started and make sure that we have enough time for our presenters today. So hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. My name is Hannah Holmes, pronouns she and her, and I'm the project coordinator here at PLEAC at the Public Legal Education Association of Canada. Today, I will keep my introduction, including my land acknowledgement, fairly short, just to give our presenters as much time and space as possible today. So firstly, I'm located here in Toronto, Ontario, and I'd like to acknowledge the land I and some others joining us today are on. And it's the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are very grateful to our speakers joining us today. I will pass it on to Priscilla in just a moment to introduce everyone, but just quickly, a few final administrative notes. We received notice, unfortunately, that our interpreter for today is no longer able to join us, but since the session is being recorded, the Law Society will support offering a translation of the video once it has been posted, hopefully. So we'll make sure to keep everyone posted and make that available once we have it, if we can. And there will also be a very brief survey at the end of the webinar. So please take a minute to complete it when you can. And then finally, please feel free to use the Q&A button or the chat to sort of submit any questions that you might have, whether it's throughout or at the end. But Priscilla will keep an eye, and myself as well, on those, and we'll save time at the end to address them, unless anything sort of comes up in the middle that's sort of more of a pressing issue maybe, but we are going to save time at the end and make sure we try to get to everybody. So hopefully I kept that brief enough. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Priscilla.
Thank you, Hannah. On behalf of the Law Society of Nunavut and the Public Legal Education Association of Canada, I welcome you to this panel discussion about decolonizing access to legal information in situations of family violence in Inuit communities. My name is Priscilla Ferrazzi, and I will be facilitating today's discussion. But first, I'd like to thank Hannah Holmes and Rachel Koholt for organizing the webinar. Thank you very much, both of you. And this is a virtual event with participation from across the country, and we would therefore like to acknowledge the diversity of the Indigenous territories where both panelists and participants are situated. And given the focus of this panel extends beyond Nunavut, we would like to also recognize all 4 Inuit homelands in Canada: Inuvialuit, Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut, collectively referred to as Inuit Nunangat. We would also like to recognize the vibrancy of urban Inuit communities, such as those located in Ottawa, Montreal, Winnipeg, and Edmonton, given that about 30% of Inuit in Canada now live outside of Inuit Nunangat. In fact, for those who are not already aware, the National Capital Region is home to the largest Inuit community in southern Canada. And we would also like to acknowledge today that many Inuit must travel hundreds of kilometers south to gain greater access to health, to education, legal services, making urban centers a hub for service delivery. And while more and more urban Inuit organizations are being established and those that already exist continue to grow, there continues to be a deep need for Inuit-specific programming in urban centers. It's for these reasons that this panel expanded this discussion beyond the geographical scope of Nunavut to include looking for ways to help support the needs of urban Inuit communities. Focus of today's panel discussion evolves out of a Law Society of Nunavut recent Access to Justice Family Violence Research and Awareness Project, which was a partnership with Pauktuti Inuit Women of Canada and funded by the Department of Justice and the Law Foundation of Ontario. As the subject matter of today's panel is sensitive and could be triggering for some, we will be posting in the chat mental health, wellness, and other resources to support participants. And these resources can also be found on the Law Society of Nunavut website. With that, I would like to introduce today's panelists, who we are very grateful to have join us today. First, Isabelle Chapadeau is from Iqaluit Nunavut and Septil, Quebec. She works for Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit Center for Inuit Children, Youth, and Families as a cultural educator. And on the side, she's also an artist, engaging in beading, sewing, digital art, and cinema. She also uses online platforms, mostly TikTok, to educate others about Inuit culture and anti-Indigenous racism. More recently, she was a speaker at Amnesty International Francophone Branch, Youth Congress, and at the Sea Change Initiative. She keeps herself busy, loves to learn about Inuit culture, and finds that a great source of motivation. Alyssa Flaherty-Spence is an associate in Gowling WLG's Ottawa office, practicing in Indigenous group and business law department with the focus on corporate commercial Indigenous law and Canada's North. Alyssa also advises Indigenous clients on community trust matters, federal legislation, Indigenous specific claims, and advocacy, including class actions such as the Indian Day School settlement. And prior to joining Gowling WLG, Alyssa worked extensively with Indigenous organizations, including Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated, Malaganic, Tukisijavik Legal Services, and the Government of Nunavut, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and Inuit Teparit Kanatami. Also, some of you would know by ITK, the acronym. Alyssa is a graduate of the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Law with a specialization in Indigenous law. She also is of Indigenous ancestry, Inuit and Cree, and calls Iqaluit Nunavut her second home. Alyssa currently sits as president and chair of Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit Center for Inuit Children, Youth, and Families. And finally, Rachel, who is very kindly agreed to step in for Cynthia Sumertuk, who is a court worker with Legal Services Board of Nunavut's Regional Clinic in Kavalik, Legal Services in Rankin Inlet, who unfortunately is not able to join us today because of internet connectivity issues. Thank you, Rachel. And Rachel is a consultant with the Law Society of Nunavut, having worked for the organization on and off since 2018, including supporting the Law Society's recent public legal education initiatives on family violence prevention and workplace harassment projects. Jointly trained in law and public health, Rachel has also done community health and health promotion work in the territory, namely providing relief for the Government of Nunavut's territorial sexual health portfolio in Pagnartung, and supporting Ilisasavik Society and programming in Clyde River, including their 28-day on the land addiction treatment program, our Life's Journey counseling program, and Turning the Tide on Tuberculosis in Nunavut project. Since graduating from McGill's Faculty of Law in 2018, Rachel has also directed the National Association of Women and Law's Rebuilding Feminist Law Reform Capacity Project, which included hosting workshops coast to coast and redesigning the bilingual online course, Feminist Law Reform 101. She's also helped update the Legal Information Society of Nova Scotia's resources on domestic violence and sexual assault. She was recently called to the Bar of Ontario after completing her articles at Amnesty International Canada, and which was supported by a fellowship through the Law Foundation of Ontario. So I now turn to our panelists and invite Isabelle to share her thoughts on best ways to reach and engage different audiences on the issue of family violence with a focus on the use of social media. Thank you, Isabelle.
Hi, sorry. Good luck, Isabel. And I just want to start to say that I'm using social media myself a lot. I'll say the past 2, 3 years, I started when I was up north, in Iqaluit when I was living there. I'm now in Ottawa. Something for sure I will talk right away is internet. For me, it's been really helpful being up in Ottawa. And I know that it can be an issue up north, uh, but I've been there and I studied there, and the information started to go around more and more. During the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, I see a lot of different subjects. I'm touching a lot of different subjects too, and I really found out that people are listening well. And for me, I really think it's important for the subject we're talking today. Um, what I suggest is to use for myself. It's been really helpful to be consistent. Like the consistency is really important in my way of seeing things because, like I said, connection can be really, really awful up north. But no matter what, someone will have access to internet, maybe in a couple of days, or like having access to a phone later on, or having access to a computer somehow. And I've been on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. For me, TikTok was the most helpful way to reach out as much as possible people. But the thing is, videos, you need to have someone who create them. And I know that we are a lot of Inuit all around Canada and not necessarily just in Nunavut. Some Inuit can be for sure there on media side, helping for the video, because that's how I see it. That's how I think. It's reaching out everyone, all Inuit, and TikTok is good for this. But I can understand the little like challenge ongoing on social media. That's why I feel like Instagram for me was a good platform to share and share around some posts that you can talk about, because I think we need to know about those rights that I don't see often and that I'm not really aware because I don't know them properly, because this is not a subject that I see around a lot on social media when I use it. Also Facebook, it might be like sometimes old school or like some people don't use it anymore, but it does reach out some Indigenous people and Inuit that are on there a lot. We're still using it today, and I think it's very important to not forget about this platform that can be really useful. Also, I was thinking that I know that it can be scary to sometimes go on social media, and I understand that because we have that there of like not understanding it well and what's going to be the backlash to. I've been there. I know how difficult it is sometimes. But my way of seeing it is if you know why you're doing it and who it's going to reach out, it's mostly the youth too. I mean, everyone's on social media, but I see more and more kids having phone, iPad, computers, and they will read those information that they might need at some point. And this is on any subject, I feel, but mostly like what we're talking today. It's really been helpful for me to be, yes, on social media. Sorry. And also using the right tools will help everyone. Like for myself, I'm using my phone, it's easy, but we need to interact with the people that will have conversation on social media, be sure that we listen to their point of view as well. That's what I'm trying to do too. And I want to repeat, we're all in Canada, Inuit, we're all around, and to all connect together. I think it's a good way to do it. I don't know if you feel like it, but I think it's been really good the past 2 years for me. Also, I want to see younger generation for sure. That's my goal as being online. I want to see young generation knowing their options, what's available for them on social media. Like sometimes you're facing some situation and you're not prepared at school, or it's not something we necessarily talk a lot, but being prepared, knowing it before it happens, I see like a good thing. And sometimes it's surprising who it can help for real. And I'm not talking just about Inuit, it's everyone who doesn't know well their rights, the laws, especially Nunavut laws are super new in our culture, I feel, to be honest. It's kind of complicated sometimes, and put it in the easier way for a younger generation to understand it. They deserve to know, and the space is there. Literally, like I've been doing it, and I saw the progress of people, like them interacting with them, and some information that I didn't know that I learned as well, and other people learn. And this is why I'm here. This is why I think we should go and move forward. And like I said, consistency, it's so important. That's why we should start soon with fun, but also educational way of doing it online is the best way to do it. I don't know if we're on the same page, if it's like what I'm saying makes sense. But for me, I know that people are ready to listen. We are all there on our phone, and sharing it's so important. Yes, that's pretty much it for me right now. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabel,
Yes.
for sharing your knowledge and experience of social media relevant to family violence and other really important issues in our society. I'll now turn to Alyssa, who will speak to funding and logistical barriers that exist at the organizational level that impact the ability to take on public legal education projects. And she will then be addressing another issue as well. And I'll speak to that when she gets to that point. Thank you so much, Alyssa.
Thank you, Priscilla. Ulakut, everyone. Alyssa Flaherty-Spence Uyunga. My name is Alyssa Flaherty-Spence. Good morning, everyone. Like Isabel, I'm in Ottawa. I was born and raised here in Ottawa, although my family, like Priscilla mentioned, is in Iqaluit, Nunavut, and my father's side is also Cree from northern Manitoba. In terms of when I talk about the organizational level and the impact, the ability and the impacts that we have to take on public education projects, when I come to that question or speak about it, I come from my experience with Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit, which is the center in Ottawa that helps in providing wraparound services to children, Inuit children, youth, and families in the Ottawa area. And so I've been involved with them for a number of years as the president and chair, sitting on their board. And there's many different things that we see as obstacles, but one of the biggest barriers when delivering, public legal education projects to Inuit in the area is language. We often see that access to Inuktitut information in the legal realm and legal education is always a huge barrier. There's insufficient access to Inuktitut speaking language interpreters, often for individuals when they attend court proceedings or even attending meetings with their lawyer. There's often a simple language barrier there, or when they're needing to complete legal documents. Often it's completed or it's presented to them in English or French, but Inuktitut is not available in those documents, and no interpretation is provided or translation. Another access to Inuktitut barrier is when they attend probation meetings or support access and understanding of victim services for those individuals as well. So language is a key barrier. A lot of Inuit, their primary language is Inuktitut. Frequently we see as Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit, the center is an example because we service so many Inuit in the Ottawa region. But as you, where you're located across Canada, I'm sure you're in the urban areas, you service a lot of Inuit as well. And so a lot of Inuit, like Priscilla had mentioned, are starting to move to southern areas and more urban areas and cities because of the lack of available services within Inuit regions, such as Inuit Nunavut, Nunavik, and Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit. And so we're often seeing that there is a push and that there is a need and a gap for providing services, legal education for Inuit in urban areas where you all may serve. And so that's a huge issue that we see is language. And just simply not understanding court documents that they have signed. We have seen that in reports. Many Inuit often will sign documents without interpretation or translation of those documents, and often, have consequences of those and don't understand what they're signing. And I've seen that firsthand myself when I was in, not just here in Southern Canada, but in Nunavut often, because of the lack of resources. Sometimes Inuit are having to deal with the pressures of the legal system itself, and it's not to the detriment necessarily of the lawyers, but of the system. And often Inuit are not understanding what their lawyers sometimes are presenting to them. I've seen that firsthand. When I was an articling student in one of the communities, I had to say "Tukasivi" to one of the clients, meaning, "Do you understand?" And he looked at me kind of blank faced and did his facial expression of no, which if you are not from the region, you may not understand. And so basic language communication is a huge barrier for a lot of Inuit. The other, I guess, I'm not watching my time, but another big thing is funding. There's just a complete lack of funding available for projects, including access to education or legal services in Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit. So we at the center received some funding, but it's still a huge lack of funding. It doesn't cover the gaps that are needed to provide services and even pay for interpreters and translators based on the need that we have here in Ottawa. And then often the funding is comes in short-term funding, so it doesn't allow for us to project for long-term planning for the services that are needed in the Ottawa area. And then lastly, we always see this is there is a human resource need to train Inuit across Canada to service Inuit within the legal system and providing legal education. And so this would be understanding how the legal system works, providing wraparound services for Inuit who are going through the legal system itself, and to help others gain the legal information they need to successfully navigate the legal system. I can't imagine how it would feel for someone who just to go through the legal system, let alone have a language barrier as well added to that. And so those are some of at the organizational level here at Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit, some of the impacts we are seeing on public legal education projects.
Thank you, Alyssa, very much for that, really informative. I wonder if you could speak to also how we can make sure that public legal education projects on family violence are culturally responsive and also trauma informed.
Yeah, so part of the center as well, we try to provide wraparound services. And one of the things that I think we take for it just comes natural to us at the center, but I think when providing legal education on specifically on family violence, we have to understand the context in which we are providing those services. And so when we talk about that, it's basic understanding of, you know, the impacts of colonialism, residential school, intergenerational trauma, especially with youth, and also MMIWG, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls issue. And essentially, when we're talking about that, we have to understand how to communicate and how to work with Inuit and clients in a trauma-informed way. And so that has a connection when we're talking about family violence. And then the other pieces is obviously, I mean, for me, it comes, you know, natural is to have cultural approaches when we're talking about family violence. So talking or understanding and being aware of the family roles for Inuit, child rearing, and how extended families are involved in supporting children, youth, and families through family violence issues, and cultural and community supports that are needed for family. And so that comes, we provide a lot of that, and it's very under our radar and incorporated in all the services that we provide, because we are wraparound services for Inuit children, youth, and families. And then again, making sure that the information provided around family violence is in Inuktitut, available for them, and to ensure that they are empowered with that information to be able to make proper decisions on their own. I would also add that legal information on its own is often insufficient for many victims of family services. And what I mean by that is projects should also provide access to advocacy, legal supports, navigation, case management, wraparound services. And also, most importantly, what I've seen a big push, and I really try to make sure that this is included, is mental health supports. You know, family health or family violence and mental health supports go hand in hand, especially when you take into consideration the history of what Inuit have had to go through policies and trauma historically throughout Canada. And so the other need is, again, wraparound services for the family when dealing with family violence. So not just talking about legal education, but what comes with it as well for the family. I would also note that having deliver family violence in a distinctions-based approach, knowing that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis are all completely different. And even within those groups, they vary as well within their cultural distinctions. So Inuit, like Priscilla and Rachel said, that Inuit come from the Inuvialu, Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut region. They all have different cultural specifics to their community. And so I would also add that making sure that the information is distinctions based. And lastly, ensuring that those who are providing services within the family violence realm are also provided anti-Indigenous racism training or you know, cultural competency training. So like police officers, court workers, lawyers, all of those who are involved with providing family violence services to Inuit need to have that base when providing projects like that. So I'll end there. Thanks, Priscilla.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for your valuable insights about funding and logistical barriers impacting public legal education, as well as how to ensure projects are culturally relevant and trauma informed. I now turn to Rachel Kohut, who will speak to first how we can make sure public legal education initiatives and projects are more accessible. So I turn it over to you, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me last minute this morning. I'll just try to share a few quick tidbits, building off a little bit of what both Alyssa and Isabel have shared. First off, a lot of what I'm about to share for this first piece is, I like to contextualize it in saying that I've really learned all of this through making a lot of mistakes and sort of framing it and admitting that off the get-go. This isn't because I felt like I've done a lot of things right, but slowly but surely sort of learning from those things and going from there. And also, I like to say that, you know, I'm also very much inspired by people like Isabel, who are kind of constantly putting out their voice and using their voice sort of to amplify some of these important messages. And it's always a constant reminder to me to how to do this work better and make it more accessible. So a few quick things that I often try to remind lawyers generally when doing this work. Again, they might sort of seem obvious, but sometimes I think we can forget them. But the use of closed captioning, I've noticed that's a function, you know, we're able to offer today, but sometimes that's often sort of overlooked even on Zoom calls. It's often a function that's now been totally incorporated on platforms like TikTok. And I think that's really great to see for a whole slew of accessibility reasons. The other thing I've noticed in certain design projects is it's making sure that fonts are compatible and also available in syllabics. There's a few actually fonts that are developed specific for syllabics, and it's really cool to see projects that are using them and really prioritizing the use of them. You can also sometimes nudge designers to make them available in syllabics as well, and sometimes people are really receptive to that. I also think it's really important that before developing any type of resource to think about how people will be receiving this information. So building off a little bit of what Alyssa was sharing, and making sure we're sort of thinking through the who's going to be reading this resource. Sometimes we can be quick to sort of start putting a pen to paper and writing something down, but sometimes even thinking like, is a pamphlet helpful? Is it a podcast? Like how should we be delivering this information? And what would be the most accessible way to do that? And again, sort of building off what Isabel said, there's a lot of power in social media, and sometimes it's scary to put something out there in social media. It's so quick, you can take a bit more time, but perhaps the reach is greater than a paper resource depending on the context. And I'd also just like to underscore the importance of plain language. Lawyers, we can get caught up in really long sentences and using words that, you know, we could probably use other words to say the same thing. And so what I often nudge people to do is get a lot of people to read over your material. Like, don't just have a few people, get a lot of people to read it over to make sure that everything is clear. And there's also a whole slew of really cool apps you can actually run your content through to make sure it's accessible. But on the same point of language, I think a step that often gets overlooked in doing this work, particularly in the context of working with Inuit communities, is the time it can take to really sort of get a solid Inuktitut translation done. And so really factoring that into projects, and maybe also thinking about doing projects in the inverse, which is drafting the Inuktitut version first if possible, and then translating to English. The other thing that's come up several times is when working with graphic designers. So you're at the final stage, you have, you know, your resource, this is the stuff, the information you want to share. And I've been in several situations where people are using imagery that is maybe not Inuit specific. Maybe it works in the First Nations context, but it doesn't work in the Inuit context. So really sort of nudging graphic designers to be sensitive and mindful of that, and also making sure they're maybe also working with Inuit artists in the development of that imagery. And lastly, for those who maybe aren't aware, I always like to flag that it's been really wonderful to see some of the technology that people do use on a regular basis become more and more inclusive of Inuktitut. I know at some of the organizations I worked at before, we've been really happy to see that Microsoft now offers a translation function that has Inuktitut built in. So sort of if you're in a pinch and you need to translate something, it's not 100% accurate, but I've heard it's pretty close. So that's something that could be used if you're sort of struggling to get an Inuktitut translation and you're in a pinch. And I think it's also really been incredible to see that the Facebook interface is now also available in Inuktitut. I think that's really important as people sort of engage with social media as a way to receive this type of information.
Thank you, Rachel. Could you now speak to some of the things that you've had to learn and unlearn when doing public legal education type work, whether in family violence or other contexts in Nunavut?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, these are big, heavy questions, but I think they're really important ones, and I think they're important ones for settlers to have also amongst themselves, and not always have to like push this labor on Indigenous folks. But I mean, one of the first things that really strikes me that really struck me when I first started doing this work, and perhaps it was because I was also coming out of my law school bubble, which was very insular. But when I first started working in communities, I had to really think about unpacking the racist bias that I had, that everyone around me in a community could speak to me in English. Why did I think that? Like, where did that sort of bias come from? And so that, to me, doing this work, it's always sort of, again, building off what Alyssa shared, is that it's really important for people to be aware that many people are unilingual, and English is not their first language. And so in delivering these resources, all of these accessibility functions are really, really crucial. For me, one of the things I've also had to learn more about, and I think I'll always be learning more about, is not really fully understanding how frequently people travel to access services, especially health services, and the fragility of those systems in communities. When people have to wait perhaps days for a flight to go out because of a storm, and they have to take several flights to get to where they need to be, you know, just weather alone can really complicate some of this can complicate access. And also the time that I've spent working in communities, I think a lot of people assume that people can just go to see a lawyer or go to the bank or go get that piece of paper or go get that piece of identification. And that's really not the case. People are often having to travel to get some of these things. And I think that really sort of shifts how we need to be approaching some of this work. The other thing I wanted to raise is just how important it is to take time to get to know people before doing work, which in and of itself is a capitalist colonialist notion, and really slowing down. You know, I myself often, you can get caught up in sort of the hustle and the bustle and the flurry, especially when you're working with in the legal bubble. But I've always really appreciated that in doing this work, it's really forced me to sort of slow down. And especially, I think this is especially important when doing work on sensitive issues like family violence. This has really created space for me to learn how to have more empathy, particularly around situations on how difficult it might be to safeguard your privacy when applying for an emergency protection order in a small community, or trying to get to the airport to board a flight, to get to a shelter in a nearby community. When you sort of understand maybe some of this context a little bit more, then it becomes, when you're drafting a resource, it can become a little bit easier to maybe understand why it's important to frame things in a certain way. I think in slowing down, it's also allowed people to get to know me too in doing this work. Oftentimes you're the person who just sort of shows up and everyone knows that you're not from there. And I think for me, it's not only sort of realizing that as a settler sort of showing up in the community, the weight that carries, regardless of whether or not I've been there before, but just the history and the legacy of the trauma that you're carrying with you is incredibly important. But I've also learned a little bit more about vulnerability and how maybe it's important for me to open up about my own experiences and traumas too, and understand that that also frames the work I do, whether I like it or not. Sometimes in sort of being vulnerable and maybe sharing some of the things that brings me to this work, it can help create a sense of trust at times. But sometimes it also is a reminder to me that I have to do more internal work to challenge my own thinking, and do that work to truly sort of decolonize the thoughts that I'm having, and say, why am I sort of thinking this way? And how is it maybe rooted in my own experience? And lastly, I know this gets plugged all the time, but I think it gets plugged all the time because it's incredibly important. And it's nudging people to do their own reading and to do their own research, to grapple about how some of these historical events have occurred and how this has impacted the intergenerational trauma that exists in current collective memory. As Alyssa and Isabel have both spoke to, the history up north is very specific. It's very specific to Inuit, and it often, I think, do this work, I think it's really sort of pulling out those distinctions. I personally have found the Kikitani Truth Commission reports to be a really great first resource for people working in the Baffin region. There's videos, there's reports, there's stories, there's narratives. And I think it helps sort of gain an understanding of even things of how people were sent down for TB treatment. That's quite unique to the north. Or understanding the role of whaling and sealing industries in communities. As someone with Icelandic heritage, I really started putting together some of these histories even on my own when I saw all of the Nordic sweater patterns that were being used when we'd go ice fishing. So even sort of tying in again, like how my own experience, like I didn't expect to see so many patterns on sweaters. And yeah, I think again, just like really sort of doing the work to really think about and situate yourself based on your own experience and motivations to do this work, contextualizing, and I think within a framing of really committing to trying to decolonize that you're thinking on it, but also doing the work to understand more and more of the history and the trauma that has happened in communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That was really helpful for all of us, I think, to understand how we can continue to learn and unlearn to make public legal education initiatives more accessible. So thank you so much to all the panelists. I'd like now to turn over a few minutes to Nalini Vadapalli, who is the CEO of the Law Society of Nunavut, for a few closing words before we take questions. Thank you, Nalini.
Good. Hi, hello everyone. I've got my written notes, but then I was taking additional notes as the panelists were speaking because there's a lot of food for thought in today's conversation. Well, first and foremost, I really wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to give it some thought on this not always easy topic to speak to. So I'm really thankful for that, and thankful for Priscilla as well for agreeing to facilitate today's session, and Rachel as well for playing a coordination role. You know, when the Law Society decided to embark in public legal education almost 10 years ago with the National Action Committee on Family Justice with then the Supreme Court Judge Beverly McLaughlin, we were a little bit unsure about the Law Society's role. But then when you think about the protection of the public, when you're living in Nunavut, we decided that we definitely had a role to try to bridge that gap with unmet legal needs. And Rachel touched upon that, the importance of providing information with support. And I feel that's the only way that we can deliver public legal education in Nunavut is to make sure that there is a strong network and collaboration, because I, as a non-Inuit living in Nunavut for over 10 years, don't always have that knowledge and understanding of how to make sure my rapport with my Inuit colleagues or Inuit community is culturally appropriate. So by building that network and building that trust is very, very important. Doing our own homework is equally important. We often go to our Inuit friends and colleagues to help us understand that the nuances or the history, but then we have a duty and a responsibility to do our own homework, and Rachel mentioned that. And I will share a list. We're very lucky. The Law Society has a wonderful public representative, Huvian Flanagan, who's helped update our reading list with a lot of interesting materials, movies, different media to help us do our own homework. So I'll share that list with Hannah for sure. When we decided to embark on family violence prevention, we knew by then, we had learned that we don't know everything, and it was important, if we were going to embark on family violence, was to create an important collaboration with an organization who had that knowledge and expertise on the ground. And we, as of today, we are still very thankful for the collaboration. I would say now it's a partnership that we've established with Paututi Inuit Women of Canada since 2018. And we were able to come together and develop a public awareness campaign that was launched in 2020. It was an incredible moment where we all came together, standing together to break the silence on family violence and gender-based violence. So even though the funding has run out, that trust that we took time to build and those partnerships and collaborations, both government and non-government, go beyond the funding. So those key messages didn't come from the Law Society, they came from the ground up. And so they remain meaningful, and we still use those key messages to come together, more so with social media now, right? We were doing more print media, but now we're really using social media to engage our Law Society members and the community as a whole and our stakeholders to come together and revisiting some of those key messages through the awareness campaign that was launched in 2020. I also wanted to just take a moment to thank all of our Inuit fellow colleagues and friends, members of the community who share their courageous stories related to family violence and empowerment and gender-based violence. Without them accepting our invitation to share their stories, our awareness campaign or our efforts would not be as meaningful. So always taking a moment to recognize our fellow Inuit who've taken that courageous step. And I can share more of those resources through Anna and with the group as well. We've also invested more and more in translation, Inuktitut, and as we look towards the Kitikmeot region, we'll be investing in Inuit as well. Very, very important. And one thing I've learned as well in relation to funding is to take the time to meet with your funders. Every time we receive funding, I will take a moment and stop in Ottawa and ask or maybe demand for an in-person visit with our funders, because I want to make sure they understand some of the unique context of delivering public legal education in Nunavut and what that means. So when the time comes for flexibility, usually they will respond positively with my requests to amend, to change budget categories, budget lines, whatnot. And I think taking that time to meet with your funders is a crucial step so that your needs that you see in a particular Indigenous setting are met. Because when you put in the proposal, maybe all of those different gaps or challenges or nuances, you did not envision them when you put together your proposal initially. So I just wanted to thank again all of our panelists for agreeing to speak on this topic with different perspective and approach. I'm very thankful on behalf of the Law Society and to Hannah as well for asking the Law Society to give it some thought of delivering this session. I hope that we might be able to do additional session on this topic, because I think our members, our Law Society members and the legal community as a whole benefit from these types of session. And I just wanted to thank everyone again, including Priscilla, Rachel, Alyssa, and Isabel. I know that Cynthia will be able to join us when internet is a bit better. It's actually quite blizzardy in Iqaluit today, so I'm lucky I'm able to actually speak to you. Very thankful for that. And I'll make sure to share all of our resources both like reading and media resources and everything that relates to family violence prevention that we've developed. We have some fantastic podcasts as well to share with the community. So thank you, everyone. Nakome. And Priscilla, maybe did you want to add something? Because Priscilla, you've also been quite involved in our family violence prevention initiative as well with PEP2T.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, Nalini. I think maybe for another time, because there may be people who would like to ask questions, and would like to give them that opportunity. But thank you. So we have about 8 minutes remaining. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to pose some questions, I'm sure the panel would be very happy to do their best to respond.
Priscilla, I see we have a question in the Q&A, just one here. I think this actually popped up while Alyssa was speaking. Gloria asks, would love to hear you share more about how you make your services wrap around and how you work across sectors in a multidisciplinary way, if that's what you mean as well. I don't know if Alyssa wants to,
Yeah. Alyssa, do you want to take a first stab at this one?
Sure. So we work with, at Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit, we are now the largest service provider for Indigenous peoples in Ottawa. And so we work with multiple partners, not just government, both provincial and territorial across different ministries, but we also work with the City of Ottawa. We work with the school boards and the police, the Ottawa Public Police, and the legal system as well, legal aid, TI, Tungasivin Inuit. So there's many people that we partner with, and also the government of Nunavut. We work in order to provide a wraparound services, we touch on different service providers across the city and provincially and territorially. So we work with multiple partners, but also when we talk about wraparound services, I'll give a couple examples specifically for family violence. If we have a family that comes to us, we may provide childcare. That's how we started at Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit, which was really small at the time. And then, there's parenting programs that we help with the family as they're going through difficulty. Mental health supports as well for the parents or for youth as well. Youth programs that we have. We also have sew-in projects. We have programs for elders. So these are all wraparound services that help. And we also help in terms of connecting with the school board, and we have programs that ensure that we work with the school board to provide culturally appropriate programs as well. And so we touch on different areas of where the family is going in their life, and the different pieces or the different individuals who are involved in that family. So not just the child, an infant, youth, we work with quite a bit, but also the parents and elders. So that is all included in the success and the process when we're talking about family violence. So those are just some of the examples.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions from participants?
I was actually going to see if, and not to put you on the spot, Isabel, but you work in a wraparound service delivery model at the hubs as a cultural educator. I'm not sure if you wanted to share anything about sort of how that looks in your day-to-day.
Oh, well, thank you for mentioning. For me, it's really a good space to be surrounded because I have a lot of range of ages, and I see how the hubs benefits well, not just the kids, but the family. In a way of they know they have support. They know that if they're coming, they're in a safe environment where they can learn their culture, which is pretty rare when they go back to their whatever physical school they're going to. Even kids decide to come here instead of their high school example because they know that they will have the support, they know the people they're around. they build relations together. And this is something I really love being here quickly. It's also sharing the real history of Inuit and having the time to chat about it. And it's all about growing in this as me as a person, but also our future generation coming. It's something I love from being here in Ottawa. I wish to see that more up north, to be honest. That's my thoughts every day. I'm like, oh, I wish everyone can benefit of this because it's helpful for the worker who are here and feel supported. And we have access to a lot of resources and Inuit Qaujimajatuqangit as well. It's really good. And on top of all this, we feel safe to learn all this. And I'm really glad to be a part of something like that because yeah, it's just really good. But thanks for mentioning it because those kids are awesome, super smart, and they can be themselves, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Isabel. I'm just cognizant of the time here. Nalini, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, just very briefly, again, when we decided to embark on, access to justice for family violence, if you're going to decide to embark on those multi-layered topics or initiatives, you got to give some time to think about your role and responsibility and what can you do to step outside the box. And that's really important because if organizations are not going to step out the box, we're never going to make positive changes. So we're a regulator, right? We regulate lawyers, but we can have a unique role. And one very concrete example, we have an open door policy at the Law Society. People can walk in, if they have a law-related question or just a bit confused throughout a process, they can come in and we will reach out to our network to find them the information or their support that they need. So I would encourage every organization to think about, yes, this is our mandate, but what can we do stepping outside the box so we can all bridge that gap and make some positive changes? If not, it's going to be a status quo, that's for sure. So I just wanted to add that in as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think perhaps we can wrap up here. Nuka, thank you for your comment in the question and answer regarding language and the importance of that in your peers that you're sort of supporting the fact that resources are translated into multiple languages. So thank you. I'd like to thank the Law Society of Nunavut and PLEAC for this collaborative effort, as well as Rachel and Hannah, of course, for the organizational side, and thank the panelists for their time and their insight, and would really like to thank all of the members of the audience, participants, for taking the time to attend this webinar, and I hope that there will be another opportunity to connect with this audience again in the future. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say again, thanks to our speakers, Priscilla, Isabel, Rachel, Nalini. I really appreciate our very informative presentation today. We are very, very grateful just on our end. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And obviously, I just wanted to quickly add that if anyone's interested in connecting with any of our speakers today, feel free to reach out to me and I can figure out a way to make sure you get connected if you have any other questions. Again, just on PLEAC's end, we're taking a bit of a break for December, so we'll pick up again in the new year. So if we don't connect again, happy holidays, or I'm sure we'll chat again soon. But thanks so much, everyone, again, and I appreciate it. Thanks, Priscilla, for your wonderful facilitation today as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.